Happy Thanksgiving, and it's Throwback Weekend here at footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Memory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Bring you our Week 12 NFL preview between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns. Now let's take a look at some keys to victory for both teams, starting with the Steelers.
I still believe the Steelers are in good hands with either Charlie Batch or Byron Leftwich, but Charlie Batch will get the start. He's the healthy one. But I think to help these guys out more and make sure they stay back there in the absence of Ben Roethlisberger is they have to concentrate more on one running back. They got to get one guy the ball and feed him, whether it be Jonathan Dwyer, whether it be Rashard Mendenhall. They have to settle on that one guy, and that just helps out the rest of the offense. It gets the passing game going, the passing game that is. It also allows you the ability for that running back to get into a groove. If they can do that, then the Steelers won't have a problem offensively. Defensively, I look at the athleticism of the linebackers, the speed and athleticism of the Steelers linebackers. I believe this week they can get to Brandon Wheaton. He's a guy that doesn't really have that pocket mobility to move out of the way of delayed pressure. And I think that can have an advantage for the Steelers as they can get some batted passes and maybe some sacks. In the secondary, I believe they match up very well versus the Browns wide receivers. They're physical, so are the Steelers corners. So look for Keenan Lewis and also Ike Taylor to be more than usual up at the line of scrimmage, getting their hands on these wide receivers so that way they don't allow these guys free release into their route. Now let's move over to the Cleveland Browns in this matchup, and this game is going to have to be won on the edges for the Browns. You look at left tackle Joe Thomas and right tackle Mitchell Schwartz. They're going to have to seal the edge in a running game. You got to be able to get to the outside versus Pittsburgh, and you also have to pass protect from those edge rushers. The offensive line completely has to make sure they communicate better to pick up the blitzes and stunts. Now the running game, you got to continue to feed Trent Richardson. The yards may not be there, the yards per carry may not be there for Richardson this week versus Pittsburgh, but the attempts have to be there. You don't want to be in a situation versus Pittsburgh where Brandon Wheaton is throwing the football more than 30 times a game. You got to give the football to Richardson and also utilize that depth you have in the backfield. And defensively, speaking of depth, how the Browns utilize that defensive line rotation will be one to watch throughout the course of the game. I think they have a lot of talent back there. Billy Wynn, Jaquay Parker, those are some of the backup guys. Get those guys involved to go against that Steelers offensive line. The fresher you are on that defensive front, the greater your chances are of getting sacks and getting pressure on the quarterback. And you look at the linebacking core, you have to be able to stop the run if you're the Cleveland Browns. Linebacker play will be vital this week for these guys. Meeting the rubber at the road, you got to make sure you put the Steelers in backed up situations. You want Charlie Batch throwing the football. You don't want the Steelers to be able to run to effectiveness, so stopping the run on these early down and distances are key. X factor for the Steelers is the offensive line. You look at last week, Byron Leftwich took some hellacious shots, which is why he's out this week, and Charlie Batch is in. So you got to keep this guy well protected. Steelers O-line has to do better. And you look at the Browns, in-game adjustments is an X factor. You got to be able to adjust properly, which is why you see a Browns team that has talent but is always on the short end of the stick when it comes down to winning ball games. You got to make those adjustments count throughout the course of the matchup. Now let's look at the personnel breakdown in this ball game. And like I've said all season long, the Browns are a talented team. They've gotten better week in, week out. The problem is they can't finish games. You look at where the Steelers have an advantage, the linebacking core, putting pressure, speed, and athleticism is something to watch this week as they take on Cleveland. Since it's Throwback Week at Football Game Plan, we're going to give a shout out to some throwback players for each team. Lewis Lips is my throwback player of the week. This guy played from 84 to 91 in Pittsburgh from my hometown, New Orleans. And you look at what he was able to do, 19 yards a catch. He was a deep threat for the Steelers in the early 80s. And Michael Dean Perry is my throwback player of the week for the Cleveland Browns. You look at a disruptive force on the interior, 11 and a half sacks in 1990. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler and 2-time first-team All-Pro. I like the Steelers in this ball game, and it doesn't matter if it's Byron Leftwich, Charlie Batch, Bubby Brister, Mark Malone. The Steelers win the same way week in, week out. They can run the football, and they win it with defense, and I think that's how they win it this week. Their defense matches up very well versus that Browns offense, and they're just going to ask Charlie Batch to not make the big mistake. I think him being a Wally vet will be able to do that. And I also want to give a huge shout out to Steeler fan forums and Brown fan forums for always showing football game plan support.